This is the Reason interview with Nick Gillespie. Is satire possible anymore in a world that outstrips our imagination on a daily or maybe even an hourly basis? My guests today are two young and extremely funny novelists who are redefining satire in the 21st century, and they're doing a pretty fantastic job of it. Leigh Stein is the author of Self-Care, which is set at a woman's wellness startup where things go very wrong. And Julius Taranto is the author of How to Win a Nobel Prize, set in a secretive university funded by a reclusive billionaire and staffed exclusively by faculty who have been canceled elsewhere. We talk about the widely pronounced post-election vibe shift, in which artists feel emboldened once again to slay sacred cows with impunity. And we explore whether markets for books, movies, plays, music, and other forms of creative expression are really capable of supporting a new era of satire, parody, and self-examination. This interview was recorded at the Reason Speakeasy, a live monthly event in New York City. Check the show notes for more information. And please, rate and review this podcast wherever you are finding it. Here is the Reason interview with Leigh Stein and Julius Taranto. Guys, thanks for talking to Reason.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
So let's start with a kind of meta question. What do each of you think, and we'll start with you, Leigh, and then go to Julius. What's the social function of the novel? Particularly both historically, but today. Why do we write novels? Well, why do we read novels?
We read novels so that young women on TikTok have a product that they can display color-coded on their bookshelves and create content around these products. When I think of the novel, I think of it as the only art form I can think of that can deliver like a fully formed universe that can live in the reader's imagination. I don't think film and TV do that in the same way. I've dreamed about novels that I'm reading, but I don't dream about movies and TVs. So for a writer to have a vision of the world as it is or the way it could be, and to transmit that through language to another reader's mind, I think is singular.
Do you remember the first novel that you read that really created that feeling for you?
I mean, I can think of novels that I read as a kid. I love The Chronicles of Narnia or The Secret Garden. I love books where there's a secret door to a secret universe. And I think that's something that still inspires me today as a novelist.
Did you feel that way about Anne Frank's autobiography?
Of course. I want to live in that world forever.
Yeah, so did she, right? Unfortunately. Julius, what about you? How do you think about what are novels good for?
This suits me perfectly to give the more pretentious answer. I think basically we're in the wisdom business, that it's one of many art forms that people lean on to try to transform themselves in some ways, often very temporarily. But reading is an incredibly good technology for getting inside another mindset. So getting in, the authors that I am attracted to over and over, it's because I want to think like this writer thinks, at least for a little while. That's a very profound draw, but also one aspect of that is sometimes they can be funny about things that you didn't realize you could be.
Do you
funny
remember
about.
the first novel you read that was I want to write this, or I want to write something like this?
I had that experience with David Foster Wallace when I was a teenager, and I've written about that, and it was transformative for me, truly was the arc of my life.
Was it, which book was it?
I started with the essays, and then I think I read Oblivion, and eventually I got to Infinite Jest.
Right.
I probably still read it too young even then. Yeah,
it's. I can remember when his first book, or at least popular one, was The Broom of the System.
Yeah.
Which was sometime in the 80s. That had that effect. I knew a lot of people. I'm roughly his age, or I was born the same time as him, and that rocked a lot of people's world.
Yeah.
And he was definitely a system builder like that, and a satirist. What do you think the function? I mean, do you consider yourself satirists, because your books are very funny? And I guess it's like a shorthand to say, well, your novel was satirical. Could you describe very quickly what Self-Care was about? Like, where's it set and what's it about?
Yeah, so I've written 6 books, and not all 6 are satires, but my book Self-Care became my breakout book, so it's now the book that I'm known for. So people will call it my debut. It was my 4th book. But Self-Care is a satire of the wellness industry and girl boss feminism. It's about these female co-founders of a wellness startup called Ritual, which is spelled Richual, which is kind of like Goop meets Instagram. So it's like a women-only social network. And they are torn apart and taken down by accusations of assault and turmoil that roils their online community.
So what's the function of satire?
So I think satire is the comedy of beliefs. So to write a satire, I think you have to have a coherent belief system, and you create the comedy by establishing a main character who thinks they're acting virtuously and self-righteously, but the consequences of their actions are immoral. Yeah. And I think that's in Julius's book too. But I would like to hear you answer. What define a satire?
Describe what How to Win a Nobel Prize is about.
The premise is, and you should know that I wrote this in 2020. The premise is that a bunch of people who have been canceled for reasons good and bad are brought together by a super billionaire to found a new university that is just kind of by and for the canceled. And a graduate student who has not been canceled herself has to go there because her advisor was. So it's kind of like a canary in the mine, fish out of water.
And it's on an island in the Long Island Sound where you can see New Haven.
Yeah, there's a tower, and the billionaire's office has a telescope that points at Yale.
So what do you find though? Is there a social function of satire? What's the wisdom in satire, I guess?
I think it's like puncturing pieties, right? A lot of art does that in various ways, and if you're really lucky as a writer of comedy or satire, you see a piety that is broad enough and persuasive enough to like a lot of people that you can inhabit it and then like take it to its logical conclusion, and the logical conclusion will look absurd to people. But I mean, it's hard to get ahead of that as a novel, because writing a novel takes a really long time, and absurd ideas seem to find their logical conclusions in about 12 seconds on the internet.
Well, yours held up, post 2020. Just quickly, your protagonist is female. Did anybody in the reviews or in discussion of the book comment on that?
No one has gotten mad at me about it, and I'm wondering, where is the controversy, guys? We could really stir up a storm in sales, No one actually seems to have been disturbed by it, but I think many people kind of had the same reaction you had of like, well, you decided to do that. I think
the headline should be like, the man in Brooklyn who read Infinite Jest writes female protagonist.
Yeah, I know. That's right. Because we should point out David Foster Wallace, I guess posthumously, was effectively canceled for being a horrible, on a personal level, to at least one of his partners, who unfortunately is a very famous memoirist herself, and she really got the last word in on that. So
you have to be nice to memoirists.
That's
and
good.
Satirists.
And
satirists.
Yeah. So what I'm going to read from what used to be a famous essay. When America was an educated and elite country with real class and culture, unlike it is now, of course. In 1961, Philip Roth, the novelist, wrote a piece for Commentary, and I just want to talk about this because it gets to one of the things that I really want us to focus on. This was an essay that was titled something like, the American writer in America, or whatever, the writer in America in the mid-century, and he writes, "The American writer in the middle of the 20th century," this is 1961, "has his hands full in trying to understand and then describe and then make credible much of the American reality. It stupefies, it sickens, it infuriates,
And finally, it is even kind of an embarrassment to one's own meager imagination. The actuality is continually outdoing our talents, and the culture tosses up figures almost daily that would be the envy of any novelist. Who, for example, could have invented Charles Van Doren? If you remember the movie Quiz Show, he was a Columbia English professor and the son of arguably at the time the best known, most highly respected American literary scholar at the time, Mark Van Doren, who cheated on a game show. Who could have invented Charles Van Doren? Roy Cohn and David Schein, Sherman Adams and Bernard Goldfein, Dwight David Eisenhower. Who could have imagined these people? I want you to, do you feel that, when you hear Roth writing that, or you see him writing that, 60 years ago, do you feel sympathy with him, or do you feel like, what was he talking about?
I read that essay first. It's an amazing document because it holds up incredibly well, and my reaction to it is, wow. I mean, 1961, and it is the same situation, and it probably was the same situation, 100 years before him. Like, I don't think a generation of writers or people has come up thinking life is pretty simple, right? That's not the impulse that gets you to be a writer. And the things that I feel are absurd now are surely going to look passé to my kids, right?
Leigh, what do you think?
I was thinking about at the time that he wrote that, there was kind of the mainstream and the counterculture. And I don't know that we have that anymore. I feel like we have 10,000 microcultures. And I know I think for Philip Roth, his whole kind of project as a novelist was kind of to convey the American experience, and he was wrestling with what was the Jewish American experience versus the American experience. He wanted to be American above all. But I don't feel like I have the same, I don't feel like I'm trying to write the great American novel. I feel like I know what my little universe is, and it's white women on the internet. And so I'm just I'm getting really specific.
You guys have all the power, right? I mean, that's what I hear. Or at least you take all the abuse, right?
We're the greatest victims, just so you know.
Of course.
So I feel like that my project is so specific. I don't have the same angst that he had at that time.
Do you talk a little bit more about that shift between, at the time Roth was writing, there was kind of high culture, and I don't even know if that's the right term, but there was an establishment culture, and then there was definitely the beginning of a real counterculture, and this was the Beats and things like that, or people the Grove Press, say, as opposed to Farrar Straus Giroux, which he might have been writing for, or Viking, and that does seem to have disappeared, or has it?
Well, I mean, when he wrote that essay, everyone was watching the same nightly news.
Right.
And now we have 30% of people getting I'm making this up, that's not the right set, getting their news on TikTok. Some people are getting their news on YouTube, some people are getting all their news from your podcast, they're all...
God help them.
Yeah, they're all... So we're all getting different versions of what the American experience is.
Yeah.
And so is the novelist project to figure out how to put all that, maybe that's what David Foster Wallace would do today. He would figure out how to put all that into one novel. I don't know. I can't do that.
He seems to have been writing... Maybe he's one of the last gasps of trying to write the great American novel.
Certainly not one of the last gasps of trying. He's he has a better claim to have gotten close than most you would think of recently. But I think a couple things about the Roth essay, one that jumps out is in 1961 he goes, obviously novelists have no status anymore compared to what they used to have in 1961.
Yeah.
The other thing is he wrote it when he's 28. He has yet to publish a full-length novel.
Right.
He's about to enter one of the most remarkably productive series of decades of novel writing that I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
And
as a satirist.
Yeah,
right?
The other thing to note about the essay is he starts with American society is too baffling to write about.
Right.
He doesn't mean it, right?
Yeah.
He's about to do it, and by the end of the essay, what he's really saying is look, you can throw up your hands or you can try,
Right.
And like having your corner, I think like Leigh's approach makes a ton of sense of like, he found this very narrow subject matter. Like historically speaking, it is very narrow, right? It's Jewish American
Well, he keeps
assimilation
going back to New
experience.
Jersey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he keeps
Right,
going back
right.
to New
Yeah.
Jersey.
Yeah.
And he's like, this is how I can get my hands around the bear, right? Or how I like can at
Or
least
around
hold,
the liver,
hold
right?
some
If
of
we're
its
thinking
stuff.
about Portnoy's complaint.
Right.
So today, I mean, if you kind of flash forward to today, and I was trying to think at some point I asked ChatGPT, I said like, what are just some crazy things that happened in the past couple of weeks, and it actually returned something like, and by the way, I learned this the hard way, ChatGPT really does hallucinate, so you always have to check stuff, but it brought up Tim Walz talking about, who was a governor, who's the vice presidential candidate, who is now going around doing like a one-man show where he's fixing cars and talking about how like Republicans don't understand how cars work. And he said you can use dental floss to take the Tesla faceplate off your car if you're ashamed of driving a Tesla. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And then people are bombing Teslas. And then, it wasn't that long ago that Elon Musk got into a fight with other parts of MAGA where he owns Twitter or X, and he said to people who were against H-1B visas, like, step back and fuck your face. And like
the world's richest man.
This is the world. Yeah, this is like, Henry Ford just published the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. He didn't tell Jews to go fuck themselves in the face. Like, how do you? I guess what I'm getting at, it's like, Leigh, I'll start with you. Like, how do you narrow it down to what you are going to write about? Because like every 15 minutes, there's just like more weird shit happening.
I also was collecting my recent absurdities, and I found like the congressperson who put forward that we should buy Greenland and rename it Red, White, and Blue Land. But that immediately gets a laugh.
That is bad, yeah.
So like anything that gets a laugh, I don't know how to satirize that because I don't know how to satirize clowns. Right?
Yeah.
So like there has to be a self-seriousness. There has to be a sense of like, I really believe this. This is serious for me. Like, I am virtuous. Like, I'm doing this for the right reasons. That's where I can kind of, like, get my poker in and skewer it. And that's why I think, though this is an interesting thing about the reception to my own novel, Self-Care. I wrote Self-Care as kind of like a Trojan horse. So the horse is the satire of the wellness industry. Like, let's make fun of Gwyneth Paltrow. Like, we could do that for an hour. It's funny. Her products are expensive. But then inside that Trojan horse, I put a satire of girl boss feminism, which is trying to combine, like, let's become billionaires and let's do social justice at the same time. And then I put a satire of the left-wing feminist activists who are on the internet trying to take those girl bosses down. But not everyone recognizes the satire of the left-wing activists. They think those people are me. So they think they're looking at a window and not realizing they're looking at a mirror.
Yeah.
And so the reception to the book has been really interesting because everyone wants to say, like, I totally know what you mean about Gwyneth, And this is partly why it's been so successful. Like, I've gotten new readers for it. But the people who say, like, your book made me uncomfortable, I'm like, you got the book. So I'm making fun of my own kind.
Your book also, I mean, or Self-Care also has a very interesting kind of class dimension to it, which is often lacking. I find it in just a lot of popular culture or cultural in general. Is class something that is easy? And I don't know, it's not really, you're not satirizing it, but is class, are we allowed to satirize class differences anymore?
Oh, yeah. Well, we're allowed to satirize the wealthy.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of money and privilege in
we're
your
in fact
book.
required to satirize.
Right, that's White Lotus. Can we mock and ridicule the lower classes?
I mean, coming from, I think there's like this, there's a delicacy about it because most of the people who are in a position to be, writing satirical novels and having them published and read by anyone, you probably have something going for you, right?
Right.
But that said, like I think the ideologies that those transmit across class, right? Like it's one of the most like remarkable features of like the political moment we live in is that I mean, the agreement between like the MAGA base and like many exceptionally wealthy people, there was just this convergence in this past election cycle, and the middle class seems to have been brought along too. And it's kind of this astonishing thing that no one understands yet.
Right.
So I think like it wouldn't be like, haha, look at how much it sucks to be poor. It would be, like,
But it
here,
is.
here are some
This
ideologies
was
that
the
transmit
when
across,
when
yeah.
Trump emerged in 2015 and 2016. This is an old and tired routine, but it's like, oh, he's so classless, right?
Yeah.
He's an Araviste, and he gold plates everything, and he gets his steak cooked well, and he puts ketchup on it. Can you believe this? I mean, there was a whole mini cottage industry of just the people like rolling their eyes at that.
Yeah.
And, but then, Kamala Harris, like, seems it's easy to make fun of her, right, for different reasons. Do either of you have a politics? Do you consider yourself liberal, conservative, libertarian? So, I mean, Leigh? How do you define yourself?
I gotta go.
As a novelist, I'm exceptionally and deliberately anti-political. Like I think it's very. It doesn't work for me to like think about writing individual characters if I'm like too fixated on what team they're on.
Yeah.
And like my novel has like
Everybody.
libertarians, kind of more classical conservative / liberal, intense leftist is the like spouse of my main character. And the project of writing those people, it sort of was like, oh, I have to inhabit them at least for a time and sympathize at least for a time. And, I do have, I vote, but I'm not going to tell you how.
Why not? Why not? What? And I'm not, on a profound level, I don't care. But what's the reticence of saying, I mean, Philip Roth is a good example. He had definite political commitments that would not necessarily map onto contemporary terms either in ways. But why are you reticent to say I'm this or that?
I don't think it's required for every writer, but for the type of writing that I'm interested in doing, where like it ends up a lot being about like political disagreements, committing publicly, it actually reduces the aperture of my own uncertainty. Where like if I say I'm blah blah blah, and then like maybe tomorrow I'm going to feel a little bit more obliged to be blah blah blah,
right?
Instead of kind of letting my imagination go where it's willing to go without locking myself
Leigh,
in.
you bought enough time to come up with something.
Now you do
what
it.
Are
Dance.
You? What are you?
I would say I'm a former left-wing feminist activist. For 3 years, I ran a feminist nonprofit writing conference and Facebook group for 40,000 women, and burning out on that experience and watching that whole group be eaten alive by its own members is what led me to write Self-Care. So that was a foundational experience for me. That ended in 2017. So from that experience, I would say I've moved much further to the center. I'm a registered Democrat in the state of Connecticut. But I'm definitely much more center than I was far left then. And there's a funny joke in my marriage. My husband likes to tease me because at the time when I was running this feminist writing conference, he wanted to become a police officer. And I burst into tears and said, but what will my friends think? So that was like a low moment. I was like really into the group think and having the correct politics, which is easy to satirize once you get some distance from that.
So another great kind of companion essay to the Roth essay from 1961 is one that Tom Wolfe read in 1989 called "Stalking the Billion-Footed Beast," which appeared in Harper's and is online. You can find it for free, and it's very interesting. And at one point, he was talking. He kind of references Roth, and he says Roth and people who that were befuddled by American society, what was starting to happen in the 60s, they left the field open for journalists, mere journalists like him, to go out and report because people started writing about writing, and he talks about a variety of experimental novelists. But then he has some fun with it. He says, like, even today, like, who couldn't sympathize with what Roth's writing about? Even today, perhaps especially today, anyone, writer or not, can sympathize. What novelist would dare concoct a plot in which, say, a Southern television evangelist has a tryst in a motel with a church secretary from Babylon, New York? Did you have to make it Babylon, he asked. And is ruined to the point where he has to sell out his worldly goods at auction. And he's talking about Jimmy Swaggart and Jessica Hahn. Anybody here remember them? These are one of the other things that's sobering is that you realize these headlines that form so many impressions of your universe really kind of term out, and then they are no longer important. Like, Roy Cohn and David Schein, I happen to know who they are because I'm obsessed with Cold War kind of trivia, but a lot of people are probably like, who's that? And then, Wolfe says, what novelist would dare dream up such crazy stuff and then ask you to suspend your disbelief? In his 1987 novel, Bonfire of the Vanities, he actually predicted by a couple of months the Tawana Brawley scandal, which was a huge thing in the late 80s. It's amazing because if he had written afterwards, people would have been like, you're being derivative, but he was actually prescient. But Wolfe wrote very passionately in favor of kind of realist novels that were really paid attention to detail. And he, at various points, talked about when he was researching Bonfire of the Vanities, which was his first novel, he went to Bronx courtrooms and for weeks and took copious notes, and he would research things and all of that. And what I would like to ask, you guys are not writing nonfiction novels, which had a brief boomlet for a while, but how important is it to pay attention to detail in what you're doing, or to know you're inventing a world, but you have to know that world, and like, how important is it to, represent things kind of realistically or with an authority that is somehow drawn from the real world?
I mean, it's very, very helpful to have details. Like, my imagination runs out of like material on its own really quickly. And yeah, everything I've like published or will publish has, I expect, an intense research component. And like, there's no reason to run from it aside from like, it's kind of a lot of work sometimes. But I also think some really high works of art that don't look researched are like feats of enormous memory, right? It's like, you wouldn't think like, oh, Proust had to do research for his book. He just had an incredible like memory for detail and could like reconstruct his world without it. So like, that turns out to be interesting. But most of us, if we're writing about contemporary life and our own contemporary lives, it's probably very similar to contemporary lives of lots of other people, and hence not that interesting to read about unless we go and learn some stuff and give it to them.
Yeah, your novel, I mean, it's a great contribution to the genre of kind of academic novels or campus novels. There's a Roth type character there. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that kind of plays out in your world?
Yeah, I mean, that's almost a perfect example of this. Before I started working on my book, I was just kind of in a Roth phase. I was reading a fair amount of him. I was interested. I was trying to figure out how it would feel to like talk to him. And
you never met him?
Never met him. And that use of his books as like research for my imaginative attempt to like, what would it be like to like meet this guy, and then how would this guy react to certain circumstances that are in the book and also sort of in our world that he didn't quite live to see. Yeah, that's like a perfect demonstration of like research plus a little imagination equals a brilliant character.
Yeah.
That you will
No, it
always-
is.
Truly.
It's very, and Roth also is one of those few novelists, in particular, writers. He was powerful enough not only to cancel himself but his biographer.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's like you want to kind of stay away from that. That's like, uranium or something. But what about you, Leigh?
I can give an example from self-care, which is that I guess I not only do I do research, but I guess I have kind of a method acting approach to my novels because I kind of lived the nonprofit version of self-care, and then I learned to become a TikTok creator to write my TikTok novel.
Yeah.
But in self-care,
Which we'll talk about in a little bit.
yeah. So in my real life, in my real job as a feminist organizer, my conference ultimately folded like a house of cards due to this controversy that split the community into two over the question of whether we should allow babies at the conference. This is what destroyed it. Yeah. And it was so stressful. I mean, it's like so traumatizing to even remember this because half the women were like, how can you call yourselves feminists and not have nursing babies at the conference? And the other half were like, this is the one weekend I get away from my kids. How can you have babies at the conference? It was so divided. And it culminated in a protest where a speaker who had just given birth 6 weeks earlier sat court around a fountain with her nursing infant, and her acolytes kind of came to her. That isn't funny enough. So like in self-care, I have a similar protest, but the protesting women are carrying their infants with them, and they're wearing these face masks that you buy at Sephora, like sheet masks that are kind of melting off their faces as they're protesting. So to write satire, I had to like exaggerate the thing that was real. I think that's what makes it satire, because it's not funny. And even some people, after self-care was a hit, people were like, you should write a memoir of your experience. But the memoir would just be like
A bad version of it.
It would be all my grudges and resentments, but like it wouldn't be funny.
That could be fun to read, It's common to say that we are in a post-literature or literate America. And there's actual evidence to suggest that people are reading fewer books. Men don't read novels anymore, right? We've all heard this. So if you are a man and you've read a novel, you have something wrong with you, okay, or something. I don't know, but like, do you take that seriously? Do you feel like Leigh? Why don't you start? Or are we post-literary?
I have to push back on this
Yeah.
because I've seen what TikTok has done for reading. I started this by joking about TikTok, but I really think TikTok has been extraordinary for books. There are like trashy romance novels that are popular on TikTok, but there is a whole TikTok community devoted to literary fiction on TikTok, and that's where I live. And BookScan, who tracks book sale data, in 2020, there were 9 million books sold thanks to TikTok. In 2023, there were 53 million books sold thanks to TikTok. Yeah. So what I see on TikTok are young women, especially 20-something women, saying, I loved reading as a kid, I stopped reading, TikTok got me reading again. So I feel excited about this, and I'm not a snob about it. Like, I feel like read what you like, because it might turn you on to, I see on TikTok
What
like...
you like.
Yeah, but I see on TikTok, like, what are literary novels for beginners?
Right.
Like they're curious. They'd like to read harder books.
Do you feel, and Julius, you can jump in on this too, like, do you feel like the novel has been feminized? I mean, in a way, it has always been a kind of feminine form, or that was one of the attacks on it. It was not epic poetry. It was this thing for women, occasionally even written by women in the late 18th, early 19th century. But do you feel like the novel has become feminine?
I don't, in the sense that, like, I don't feel distinctly undernourished, right? Like, I'm a very demanding reader. Writers that I really like and want to read a lot of are exceptionally rare. And I can't, it's hard for me to imagine that, like, if I'd lived 40 years ago, I'd feel like, oh, it's so wonderful, all these like brilliant men getting published, how will I ever keep up? Like, no, I'm sure I would have like been very selective at the time too. So I don't feel undernourished by it. And to like the broader question of like decline of literary culture, decline of reading, like I take it seriously in the sense that like, I think the world is way more competitive. Like the competition for attention is serious. I think podcasts are a big place where like men who would otherwise like be reading books or maybe spending more time reading books are getting some of their juice, because like actually this is like what we're doing right now. Like we're eating our own audiences as writers, because
So
it's
you're
like,
saying, what I'm hearing is that if podcasting did not exist, Joe Rogan would be writing.
all right,
you know.
I heard you on Jon Stewart,
Okay.
and you compared Trump to Bob Dylan.
Yes.
For changing masks. I would compare Joe Rogan to Proust.
Okay.
And here's the case I'm going to make. You listen to him, it's super long.
Yeah.
One.
Right.
Two, it's sort of like open and curious, and he's just kind of like nodding along while people say some like kind of wild stuff. Also very Proust. Three, deep suspicion of the medical establishment. Like half of Proust is just him whining about doctors.
Right.
And I think we know who his real inheritor is now. It's Joe.
Yeah. I only hope that Rogan would appreciate that. Yeah. I think he would.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
The book publishing industry employees, 73% white women. So that is absolutely shaping the books that are being published. When I was running my conference, I think we saw ourselves as underdogs. This is one of the things I've changed my mind about. It was like women need to come together. And what I've come to realize is like, no, why can't we accept we're literally running the publishing industry? Like we're winning, we're choosing the books. And so I think it is harder today for a straight white man to get a literary novel published. I imagine it is harder for that category of people.
Is that bad, or is it no? And by that, well, what I mean is because, I suspect that men have an easier time of, getting movie scripts produced or to direct them or something like that.
I think the bar has just gotten higher.
Yeah.
Like it's not impossible.
Right.
I was going to bring this up earlier. You asked us what our favorite books were recently.
Yeah.
I love this writer, Nathan Hill. He's written 2 books, The Nicks and Wellness. I love his writing. It's partly satire, but partly realist novel. I really like him. And I recommended him to a male novelist friend I like. And he's like, women keep recommending this to me. And it was a Oprah book club pick. And I was like, oh, Nathan Hill, that genius.
Yeah.
Like he figured out how to be a male novelist writing for an audience of women.
Yeah, that's a perfect. I had Nathan Hill in my head when I was saying like I don't feel like undernourished in the sense that like men are writing realist novels largely about like modern day or nearly modern masculine experience and selling absolute tons of copies. Like Franzen still sells a lot of copies. And that's just exactly what this is. I think there's this avant-garde of literary culture that is in fact very small and not very interesting to most actual readers, that that men feel like they have a hard time getting ahead or like getting to be the star child. And maybe it is harder, maybe it's not. It's actually not that important to like the number of books in the category that I would consider literature that are like being read by people everywhere.
Do you, speaking, one of this is coming out of a kind of libertarian sensibility. One of the things that was always charged, markets will, provide anything, and that markets, run to the lowest common denominator, and it gives us comic books rather than Proust or whatever. And I have a long and tedious course that I could sell you on why all of that is mistaken and whatnot. But what I want to ask about is, are you finding a marketplace for what you do? Leigh, you have an entire kind of Substack empire. Could you talk a little bit about that? And are you do you think you're hustling harder than, I don't know if you were, than Joan Didion did? Is that an apt comparison?
So the difference between me and Joan Didion is that I had a live journal and she didn't. So I've been on the internet publishing my writing since 2003. Like as a teenage girl, I've been publishing my work on the internet. So I've been on the internet for so long. Like a lot of writers, and Julius can speak to his own experience, but like a lot of writers are really reluctant to be in public, to share their work, to be online. They feel very awkward doing it. And they ask me like, how do you do it? But to me, I've been doing it for so long that I don't think about it. So I have a Substack called Attention Economy. I have a business coaching writers. I try to teach writers how to be online and the difference between writing and content. So my novels take years to write. I mean, and they're all in private. Like I'm not serializing. I'm not Tom Wolfe. I'm not serializing my novels in public. I'm revising them over many years and workshopping them over many years. But my content is more like tweeting. It's more like hot takes quick. I'm sharing education. I'm trying to teach. It's more my teacher hat. And so that's how I differentiate between these two modes of creation, even though they're both written.
Do you feel like the marketplace is pretty good for, obviously for that material, but also for your fiction?
So my argument to writers is that on one hand, it's the best possible time to be a writer because if you can grow a TikTok audience, you can sell a book. Right. It doesn't matter if you have an MFA from a prestigious school. I'm a high school dropout. I don't have an MFA. I've published 6 books. So the internet has been my pathway. But at the same time, it's never been more competitive because now that the gates have come down, you're competing with so many writers. Right. Agents get thousands of queries. And so my argument to writers is like, if you can learn this internet stuff, if you can be online, if you can start a podcast like Nick, you can grow an audience for your own work instead of relying on your publisher to go create a brand and an audience for you, because that rarely works.
Why did you drop out of high school?
Depression and anxiety.
Okay. That's really not a good answer. But, that just explains my sophomore, junior, and senior year of high school. All you have to do is show up, and they'll give you a diploma. But, all right, Julius, what about you? Because you were a lawyer, and I guess you're still a lawyer. I guess that's kind of like being an alcoholic. You can never not be a lawyer, right?
I go to the meetings, but sometimes I can't help it.
But you saved up money, and then you are writing. You write in a different way. You're not constantly in view.
Yeah, I don't have the metabolism that I think many successful internet writers have. Leigh clearly has it, and I mean that boils down to 9 out of 10 of my thoughts are not smart at all.
Right.
And I can't risk
That's
letting them
really
in public.
not a reason not to share them with the world. No.
I can't risk letting those out there.
Okay.
But the broader reason is I think it's a lot of sensibility. Just the internet is really brutal if you, like me, are not cool. It's it just does not favor the uncool. So you sort of have to decide how you're going to navigate reality as it is. I swear when I start a TikTok, it's not going to take off.
No.
I may start one, but it's not going to take off.
I guess we should point out you were the Star Wars kid, right?
The Star
Which
Wars
I guess
kid.
nobody, that was a meme. That is gone now, so we'll let that slide. Are you able to live as a novelist who, what do you figure? You'll publish a novel every 3 years or so?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm really lucky, right, I'll get to publish a novel every 3 years. And would it make for a living based on the type of novels that I want to write? Absolutely not. Not close.
Let's talk a bit about biography. That's always good. Leigh, where are you from, literally and figuratively?
I'm from Chicago. Some of you might have heard that in my voice. One of my TikTok videos went viral, and the best comment I got was I had to Google where you were from because you sound like you're from Chicago. So even though I've been here for 20 years, I still sound like that. And I think I talked a little about my biography. I have kind of an unusual educational background. I finished my bachelor's at Brooklyn College after I published my first 2 books.
Really?
So I wrote those books first.
Why did you go back to college? Or why did you go to college?
I think I just wanted to finish it. I just wanted to complete it. And I really liked Brooklyn College. I had a brief stint at the New School, and I hated the seminar style where it was more about what the students thought. Yeah. I was I don't care what you think. I really liked Brooklyn College where it was lecture style and you just show up and it was a lot of immigrant kids and we just took notes and did our work. And
do you have a favorite novelist of all time?
Margaret Atwood is the reason I became a writer because I loved her novels and I loved that she was a novelist and a poet because I'm also a poet. So she was kind of my North Star. I moved to New York originally to go to acting school and I would go to Housing Works and buy used copies of all the Margaret Atwood novels. Right. So she's my inspiration.
Is she still an inspiration? She's a bad feminist, right, by her own accounting.
She's
but
great,
she's a remarkable not only for the persistent, I mean, she's been around for decades, but really goes to complicated places all the time.
Yeah, she's brave and she's outspoken. I'm not as interested in her climate fiction. That's just not my kind of my jam. So I haven't read some of those, but yeah, I think she's an icon.
Julius, where are you from, literally and figuratively?
I grew up around DC, and this is like a perfect counterpoint of like I went to a really fancy high school where like the president usually sends their school-age kid.
Okay. Which one is that? Sidwell Friends?
Yeah, to Sidwell Friends.
Yeah.
And then I went to a small liberal arts college, and then I went to Yale Law School. But from high school, I kind of had writing going on. I kind of knew that this was something I wanted to do seriously. I was like, in thinking about like, where did this start? I realized that at the end of high school, like a lot of schools, they'll give seniors who they know aren't going to do any work, like a senior project where like you can go and basically like play soccer and then like say, I played soccer, and then you get to graduate. What I did was I wrote essays that were not required by school. It was like I could have chosen to play soccer, but instead I like wrote essays because I like wanted to work on that.
Did they put you like send you to a doctor for a psychiatrist?
They should have. This might have been an easier journey over the last 20 years. I practiced as a lawyer, but have always kind of known that I would keep carving out time for writing, and that's kind of the plan to have it.
You had mentioned David Foster Wallace. Is he like a major figure for you in the way that you kind of think about things?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly very formative. Not less important to me now than he was when I was like 18 to 22, which I think is actually quite a common experience for like if you discover him at that age.
What did you like about him?
The basic thing was sort of what I said at the beginning of like I started reading him as like, oh, I want to think like this guy. But it's kind of the same thing that I think a lot of like comedians experienced the first time they like saw Carlin or a Carlin special or whatever, where it's like, oh, this perspective. This is a perspective I want to keep trying to inhabit. And if like writing is the way I'm going to like get wiser and cleverer and more knowledgeable and kinder, hopefully, like that, like this is what I'm going to keep doing. So it felt like somewhat like related to moral development, and also like it's just exciting. Like it's more exciting than like gaping at a TV.
Is there another novelist that kind of you steer your, I don't know, boat by? I've never navigated an open sea, so I don't know what I'm at. Like who else?
Now it's much more of a constellation, and I'm also much more open to like things changing over time. Like as a 18-year-old, I was like, oh, this is my guy forever, and then he killed himself. So maybe that wasn't the solution. But
he's opening up space. That's one more slot, right? That's
in the market.
Now I don't have quite the same like individualized, passionate focus, but I do get very excited when I start reading something great.
Leigh, you also write criticism, right, or reviews and things like that. How is that related to your fiction?
Yeah, so I think I don't write reviews, but I do write like cultural criticism, and I had this, when I wrote Self-Care, no one would buy it. It was rejected over 20 times in 2019. By the time it came out in the summer of 2020, all the girl bosses were being canceled. So it looked like I was an oracle.
I believe we call them CEOs these days, right?
That is, And I wrote an article, someone invited me to write an article that summer called The End of the Girl Boss is Here for Medium.com, one of their publications. It ended up being one of the top 10 read stories of Medium for that year. So it was like all the research I had done and all the thinking I had done. Instead of a novel, it was an essay. So I think of my culture writing as very similar to my satirical brain. And actually, I had a poetry collection come out after that novel, and one of the notes from my editor was basically like, some of these poems sound like op-eds. You know, like I had become too much of a critic that some
That's
of the
really
poems.
what you want to hear, right, as a poet? Yeah.
So I had to kind of make some of the poems a little more ambiguous because I had learned how to be a kind of opinion columnist or a critic,
Right.
which is a different kind of mode than a poet. So I have
Yeah.
these different modes or these different hats.
Is poetry viable these days? I mean, and by that I mean, you know, maybe very few people make their living as a poet, but poetry seems to be very popular.
Yeah, it's almost like pop poetry, like pop songs. Like pop
Yeah.
poetry is very popular on Instagram. You can become a best-selling poet.
Right.
You can hit the New York Times bestseller list as a poet. It's a very specific kind of poetry. It's like a self-care poetry, and I don't mean my self-care.
Yeah.
I mean like the sincere self-care.
Yeah.
So it's poems that make women feel seen and understood, like a poem you could send to your friend who's in a crisis.
Right.
Like that's the kind of thing that goes viral and that you can get a book deal for. So if you write that kind of work, it's never been a better time to be a professional poet. When I was coming up, like professional poet was a joke.
Right.
Because you exist in like the favor economy. You're just trading poems with other poets.
Let's talk about what comes next. Julius, what are you working on?
I have a book coming out either end of next year or the beginning of 27 that is set at the Battle of Gettysburg, involving, this is a real guy who I learned about and then did a bunch of research and then forgot a bunch of my research in order to like write a decent version of the book. This 70-year-old man who stumbles into the battle, probably drunk, gets shot several times, somehow survives, and then is kind of held up as a national hero, like get off my lawn, General Leigh type dude. And he was crazy famous through the end of the Civil War. The Senate or the Congress passed a bill to like give him a pension as if he were a real military hero, but basically he's just this like drunk guy who got lost and shot several times.
That
He's
sounds
the
great.
the main
What are you
character.
hoping? I mean, what are you illuminating through a kind of writing about him?
What I think drove me when I got started on the book was kind of a time of, I wanted to imagine a time of national crisis different from the times of national crisis that we currently live in, where something was still funny. Like where something funny and humane was really happening, and I wanted to sort of like, there's this cloud of like the most dramatic and important moment in American history, and at the center of it somehow is this buffoon. That feels kind of
Yeah, that sounds so different than the world we're living in right now, right?
Can I just say, I was at the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, and you like see Abraham Lincoln riding by in a golf cart, and it's like totally surreal.
And what you have a book coming out in August.
I have a book coming out in August. It's a Gothic novel set in a TikTok hype house. And if you don't know what a hype house is, it's like a mansion where all the influencers live
Right.
together and make content. We could make one tonight all together.
Yeah.
And in my
great.
novel, one of the influencers has gone missing. And so it's a satire of millennial fears of aging, because it's a 39-year-old woman living with these like 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
And then also this Gothic suspense. So I'm trying to mash those two genres.
That sounds fantastic.
Together.
The Gothic seems, you know, it's. I guess it certainly preexists the novel, but it's I don't what a genre, whatever, a trope that is
I think some of the
always
first
yielding
novels,
to-
some of the first novels, yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I want to thank Leigh Stein and Julius Taranto for talking. Thank you.